How can you feel more confident inside of the social setting, inside of the social world? Well, here's how it's done, everybody. The way to be more confident is by not having the fear of rejection. It's by not having the fear of other people thinking negative things about you. It's about not having the fear of all these obligations that you have to deliver on. Now, the problem is that it is very hard stopping each and every single one of these fears. And unfortunately, there's no simply one way on how to stop all these fears at the same time. Now, the great news is that the fundamental is the same. In fact, there are a few fundamentals that you can actually use. So the first one is avoidance. Now, many people talk about avoidance behaviors as being a bad thing. I personally think it's a great thing that we always do anyways, thousands of times a day. So, for example, if someone is holding a coffee cup, they're actively trying to avoid dropping it, right? So that is a negative outcome. If they drop it, then they have to expand extra energy in order to actually clean everything up, right? So that alone is a negative outcome inside of the environment. It is a negative stimulus that takes place. Okay, so yeah, that alone is a example of avoidance. And we do micro avoidance behaviors every single day, thousands upon thousands of times a day. If you drive a car, same thing happens. If you study for for an exam, the same thing happens too. You really try to get the A on the exam, or simply to pass it even. Okay, so that is the first fundamental, is that you essentially have to avoid things. Now, the problem with avoidance is that sometimes you're actually forced in order to accept certain outcomes, simply since you know that you have to act on things that you really don't want to act on. So, for example, if the teacher says that everyone has to do a presentation and that's worth 15 to 20% of your grade, the problem is that you have to do it at that point, essentially. It is technically possible for you to say, hey, look, I have a speech impediment, I might not really be able to do it, or hey, I have a lot of anxiety, I really have a fear of rejection. Except in reality, I think the odds are low in that you just have to do it anyways. Okay, so the point is this, that avoidance is great until it isn't. Okay, so then at that point, the next thing is acceptance. Now, many people out there have various definitions of the word acceptance. Okay, so I will keep mine simple. Acceptance is something that you have to do. Okay, so it's not optional. Okay, so if somebody rams your car, okay, well, that's not really up to you, is it? You have to accept it because it happened already, or you have to accept it since you have to do something inside of the future. For you, okay, the rewards will actually dictate this. So the reward to pass the class will outweigh, usually, failing the class itself. Okay, so it just outweighs the fear of having to do the presentation. So that's why you're going to do the presentation. Okay, to try to avoid a bigger consequence, and that's failing the class. Okay, so that's something that's very important in order to understand. Okay, so for you, you have to act on the rewards, which of course happens naturally, happens subconsciously. It's not something that you have to try to do. Okay, but yeah, so that is the second way on how to stop fear, is by acceptance. And that is ultimately by reinforcing the pathways, the weak neural pathways inside of your brain, in order to make this situation, this hypothetical, much more normal. And that's of course called normalization. Okay, so if someone has a hard time speaking to a girl that they find attractive, they already know that chances of the girl being rude towards them is fairly low. And even if she is rude, it isn't like anything bad is really going to happen anyways. And that's why I really don't agree with a lot of people out there that say that it is actually the fear of rejection itself. I don't really think it is a fear of rejection at all. I think it's actually the fear of awkwardness. I think people hate the idea of feeling awkward. I think it is a very undesirable outcome that's able to take place. So yeah, people intentionally fear awkwardness and they run away from awkwardness. So if you are afraid of being awkward, then I want you to actually intentionally be more awkward. Since if you be more awkward, that will actually reduce your fear. And yes, it makes no sense, but the point is that that is what exposure therapy is. It is the reward. If you can see something negative as a good thing, then that alone is just very powerful, since now it's seen as less of a consequence. And of course, I will not say certain examples I have in mind, since some may seem sort of bad, okay? But the whole point is that if you can see something bad as good, or at least as better, okay? I'm not saying to see something bad as like really good, obviously, but if you can see it as better, that alone will reduce your anxiety and also your other negative emotions out there. If it's heartbreak, if it's being depressed, if it's anything else, okay? So yeah, that alone is able to be really good. Well, actually, I have to take that back. Not like depression per se. That's a different problem. Except, yeah, other like negative emotions, if it's pride, if it's narcissism, if it's sadness, okay? So these are the types of negative emotions I'm talking about. Obviously, depression is different, okay? So that's actually something else. In fact, I really meant the feeling of like depression, except not the, clinical type, okay? That's different. Okay, like that's a different problem that I can also address inside of a future video, but I'm simply talking about anxiety right now, okay, guys? So acceptance is that second way, that second fundamental. And there are, of course, other fundamentals out there that are not really as powerful, or at least they are powerful, but not really as effective, okay? So if somebody drinks alcohol, yes, it is able to be effective, but it will actually not change the reward system around, if that makes sense. So even if somebody drinks alcohol, like the odds of them committing a crime is not really gonna be that much higher. Okay, now unless if it's drunk driving, but that's different. Okay, since like that's not really social anxiety per se. Okay, so yeah, the whole point is that you have to understand that first is avoidance, second is acceptance. It's almost always avoidance, and then second is acceptance. Avoidance is that you try to avoid dropping the coffee cup, except if you drop it, then you're essentially forced to accept it, and then you have to take action after the fact. So yeah, so these are the two main ways on how to stop your fear. So, and yeah, going way back onto the beginning of the video, if you're afraid of awkwardness, then you have to actually put yourself inside of these positions more frequently. Now, obviously, exposure therapy is limited in that if you are afraid of getting eaten by a shark, you should not, jump into the ocean and get eaten by a shark, okay? I'm just saying, the more mental aspects of exposure therapy, not the physical aspects of exposure therapy. If you're afraid of, that's all I'll say about that. Now, exposure therapy, it's implemented physically, okay? So like don't really get that mixed up either, okay? Except I'm not telling you to like jump into the ocean and actually get eaten, okay? So yeah, that's the whole point. Now, yes, obviously it may sound a bit confusing since there are hundreds of thousands of examples out there that you could actually think of, but yeah, exposure therapy is able to handle most of them.